Ukrainian forces just invaded Russia. And you heard that right. Ukrainian forces invaded Russia. We believe that 2,000 to 4,000 Ukrainian troops have entered Russia in the north near the Ukrainian city of Sumy into the Kursk region. They have taken over entire cities and towns. They've taken over an important junction for natural gas pipelines. And they've pressed about 9 miles into Russia along a 70-kilometer front. That's a totally mixed, 35-mile front. Now, as my friend Ryan Macbeth pointed out, that's typically something that would be done with a couple of brigades of troops, maybe 3 or 4 times what Ukraine has actually put into, to hold that much land. And so the amount of territory that they're holding doesn't correspond with they've got troops at all points inside that area. They've basically broken through light Russian defenses on that part of the border, and then they've pushed deep into Russian territory and have held strategic spots in that territory to the point where, they're holding road junctions and railroad lines and things like that that sort of make it very difficult for Russia to speed reinforcements into that area. They've got, 500,000 troops probably fighting Ukrainians right now along the entire front, which is a long front, something like the U.S. southern border. Think the U.S. southern border, about that long, okay? About 500,000 troops. And they've been making incremental advances in this, what has become a war of attrition between them and Ukraine in the last 6 months, especially in the last 2 months. They've been making incremental advances. What happens is these armies go up against each other. They have big battles. They fight. The Russians lose a lot. The Ukrainians lose a lot. And then they sort of solidify their lines into semi-permanent lines. They dig in, and when I say they dig in, they're not digging like hasty fighting positions. They're digging World War I era trenches with massive bunker complexes and headquarters elements and supply trenches and fighting trenches and tunnels and underground everything. I mean, it is astounding. I mean, to the point where they've got electricity, they've got, in some cases, even running water. It is unbelievable. I've been in some of these trenches personally. And so then once those trenches have solidified, it gets pretty hard, because then they shore up those and make the front line trenches really strong, and then they make a secondary line and a tertiary line of trenches so that if there's a battle, they can fall back and they can inflict a very heavy cost on the enemy that's trying to take those trench lines both directions. So then it becomes super difficult for any force to make, progress one direction or the other. And this is what happened in 2014. And I was down there before the war started in 2022. And you can go back on my podcast and see some of the podcasts I made from inside the trenches down there along the border with the Donbass region. So breaking through and taking ground is incredibly costly in terms of lives and equipment, tanks and things like that. So much so that, if you were to look at a time lapse of the front lines in Ukraine over the last year, they've actually moved very little. There has not been a lot. I mean, even now where they're saying that Russia has been making incremental gains over the last couple of months, you're talking about the territory that they have taken in most places, like around Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, places like that, which I've been to personally last year. You could drive across the area that they've taken in less than 2 minutes. If there was a road there and you went from where the Russian troops are now to where they were a year ago, it would literally take you like 2 minutes of driving to make it that far. They have not picked up a lot of ground. But in this case, the Ukrainian army has gone, in 3 days, they've taken as much ground as the Russian army has taken in 3 months. And that's significant. And it looks like they're planning on holding that ground, not just rushing in there, blowing something up and leaving, because if they wanted to blow it up, they could just use a HIMARS or a drone or something like that. So it looks like they're trying to hold ground. Now, why would they do that? It's sort of boggling the minds of all the experts why Ukraine would do this. Because if they're losing ground in the south and they had 4,000 troops to spare, you'd think they'd send them down there. But Ukraine is being sort of crazy like a fox here. They're being clever rather than logical. And I like this. I like this. So here's my thinking about why Ukraine is doing what they're doing. Number one, they're going to force Russia to take troops that otherwise would have been used somewhere else and move them up to defend their own territory. This may or may not be that effective because there are theoretically troops that are conscripts that are not allowed to fight in Ukraine under current Russian law, who are available to be sent against Ukraine now inside Russia. However, we know for a fact that those conscripts that are not supposed to be fighting in Ukraine are actually being sent to fight in Ukraine with the excuse that, oh no, that's Russian, that land that has been annexed from Ukraine. So now it's Russia, so now we can send you. So they're, we don't know. So that's one reason. Distract Russia. Number two, get into the headlines in Russia that in a way that will affect the lives of Russians. Like, hey, we're coming for you, Russians. You thought that this war was only affecting Ukrainians and the soldiers that were unfortunate enough to be pressed into service to go fight or volunteer to go fight, many of whom these days are foreigners or prisoners. Well, you're wrong. Ukraine's like, we're bringing the war to you, baby. So to get into the news inside Russia to make the war less popular for your everyday Russian. That's another reason to do this. A third reason to do this is because there is this pipeline, sort of junction, that they've taken that is valuable to Russia. Russia kind of needs all of the pipelines it can get that are actually functioning right now to send natural gas to places that buy it, like Belarus or Armenia or someplace like that. They're now holding this important switching station for this natural gas pipeline, and it's not just the kind of thing that Russia can just go in there and drop bombs on them to take it back, because then they'll destroy they'll destroy that important thing they wanted. And so it gives them a better chance of actually holding it, and that's important as well. Now, the next reason why Ukraine might be doing this is because if they hold land inside Russia, they could pull the same stunt Russia has pulled and say, hey, we're going to annex this. This is now going to be part of Ukraine. Aha! And so what they're thinking most likely is that Ukraine's going, man, if the election does not go our way in November, it's likely that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going to have similar stances toward Ukraine. Trump very likely is going to, cut off aid to Ukraine, or at least force Ukraine to accept a truce or a ceasefire that does not give it the best conditions. They're going to have to swallow a very bitter pill if they are forced by Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, because she might do the same thing, to accept a ceasefire that is not great. And so they're looking to bolster their negotiating position in the case that they end up having to go to the negotiating table. And so if they actually hold land inside Russia, they can say, hey, tit for tat, you give us back Zaporizhia, and we'll give you back your natural gas switching plant in Kursk province. Or you give us back Mariupol, and we'll give you back the land that we've taken inside Russia. You see what I'm saying? So they're gathering bargaining chips now, or at least trying to do so. And I think they ascertained that we could continue throwing bodies into the meat grinder of prepared defenses that Russia has in Chasiv Yar, or we could send those same troops into a lightly defended area and actually take ground inside Russia. At this moment, that might be more valuable use of our troops. Does that make sense?